What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the heaviest show in the universe. You know what it is. We talk about metal. We talk about all things brutal. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but there are just some things in metal that aren't that good. There's so many fantastic things. Endless, fantastic, amazing, awesome things to talk about. But there's just a few less than fantastic things. And one of those less than fantastic things is deathcore. It just sucks. Let's get into it. Alright, so before you go into how much of an elitist, how much of a gatekeeper I am, and how I have this crab bucket mentality about metal, listen, let's just talk about what makes metal fantastic. So if we want to talk about why deathcore isn't so good, why deathcore basically sucks, and why other metal is fantastic, you gotta look at the virtuosity of each instrument first and foremost. Metal is a display of talent. It's a display of songwriting. It's a display of art that a lot of other genres of music don't necessarily have on the level that metal has. This ranges from death metal and tech death to even some black metal. Even older bands like new wave of British heavy metal, these guys were playing stuff at the time that other people had never heard before, that were really pushing music to its limits. We think about metal, we think about what created it, where it came from. It came from rock and blues and jazz and all these super cool genres of music that kind of coalesced into one to create something that took all the best parts of those things and made something brand new, something awesome, something fantastic, headbang and rockin'. One of the biggest things that makes metal so awesome is how down to earth it is. Metal has never taken itself too seriously. Even Black Sabbath in the beginning, they never took themselves seriously. They were just like, look, we're here to bother people. We're here to make the music that we want to make. And then that moved on to things like Venom, and they were putting pentagrams and goat heads and stuff and wearing spikes on their arms. And they're just like, we just want to piss people off, man. Like, we're not here to take ourselves seriously. We're just here to piss people off. And personally, for me, the best thing about metal is that it's so heavy without sacrificing musicality. When we look at things like death metal and tech death, we often see that these things are heavy as hell without losing the virtuosity, without losing the musicality, without losing what makes something good, what makes something mind-blowing. Personally, for me, that's my favorite part about metal, is that it's so awesome, it's so heavy, it's so brutal and headbanging, but it's music. It's still art. It's still fantastic. It's still pushing the envelope. It's still making me say, like, damn, this is a good song. There's melody here. This sounds fantastic. So with all that being said, why does deathcore suck? Well, gotta stay hydrated for this one. So first and foremost, it takes itself way too seriously, which isn't what metal is all about. Metal's not about taking yourself seriously. Look at some of these band names. We've got All Shall Perish, Fit for an Autopsy, Signs of the Swarm, After the Burial, Suicide Silence, the biggest name in deathcore. Names like these are so cringy, and they would fit right in with all like the emo post-pop punk of the early 2000s and afterwards. These aren't like, I don't want to say like these aren't heavy metal band names, because I mean, you can make a heavy metal name for whatever band you're in. It's just the name of the band. But the thing is, with deathcore, all these bands seem to follow a blueprint of what to name their band. It's going to be something super cringy. It's going to be something that takes itself way too seriously. And it's going to be like All Shall Perish or Thy Art is Murder. You go over to death metal and you look at some death metal band names. You got Death, you got Obituary, you got Deicide, and you got Morbid Angel. Like, none of these guys are taking themselves too seriously. They're just like, yeah, we're gonna call ourselves fucking Death. Yeah, it's brutal, dude. Let's fucking go, death, bro. So now let's get into the actual music of deathcore, not just the band names or the image of the band members, but let's get into the actual music and critique this music for what it is. So I'm listening to the deathcore playlist on Spotify in reference to what we're talking about here, and they start off with What a Horrible Night to Have a Curse by the Black Dahlia Murder, and I can see why they would consider this deathcore, but later on in their career, the Black Dahlia Murder became more of a melodic death metal or just a straight up death metal band, and we're actually going to get into that point later on in the video, so stay tuned for that. But for right now, let's actually get to the music. The first huge critique that I have about deathcore is the overproduced, clicky drums. And now this is something that people often criticize tech death bands for, but really beyond like a few like overly tech death bands, like something like Brain Drill, you don't actually see this in tech death too often, or even in death metal too often. And the guitars are downtuned so low to compensate for the lack of other musical structure within the song, because they're just they sacrifice everything for the heaviness of the song. That's something in deathcore that makes it such a subpar piece of music, such a subpar piece of art, because it's sacrificing everything else just to be heavy. This isn't something that you can say about death metal or tech death, or even black metal sometimes. Don't get me wrong, there's tons to criticize black metal about, but they don't sacrifice the musical structure of the song just to be heavy. They're not just trying to be heavy. One of the hallmarks of the deathcore sound is this downtuned, like B sharp, C sharp tuning in the guitars that makes what they believe to be a heavy sound. But you know, I say this same critique on Metallica's Saint Anger, which is also tuned to C sharp. Doesn't make it heavy just because you're down tuning your guitars. And I've said this about nu metal as well. I've come around to like nu metal, but the same criticism can go for them. Just because you down tune your guitars doesn't make you heavy. It doesn't make you metal. Metal is so much more than down tuning your guitar and yelling into the mic. And so that's more of the hardcore sound from the deathcore area. So deathcore takes death metal and fuses it with hardcore or metalcore. That's where that part of deathcore comes from, is from that metalcore or that hardcore punk sound, that the heavily down-tuned slushy guitar with the muffled yelling vocals. Bro, I can't stand this. I cannot stand this. I'm dead serious. This is so bad. So, what really makes the deathcore sound what it is, and what makes all of these bands really sound the same except for a select few, is the way deathcore is produced. Now, everything is so smushed together. Like, it's so hard to tell the instruments apart sometimes, especially over the vocals, because the vocals are put to such a high point because, again, they think that's what makes it heavy, is by putting the vocals to the forefront. Well, that just detracts from the rest of the music. Everything is so overproduced and smushed together under the vocals that you can't really make anything else out. And when you do make stuff out, like the guitars or the drum, that all sounds the same. They all follow the same patterns. They all follow the same. You got the pinch harmonics in there. That's like a consistent thing. So it's breakdowns. Holy shit, breakdowns are the most overused thing in the core genres. I actually enjoy a lot of metalcore, not all of it, but a lot of metalcore I do really enjoy. But in metalcore and deathcore, breakdowns are so overused. It's like every song has a breakdown. Every song relies on the breakdown as part of its structure, and that's not what breakdowns are for, especially in metal. And if you go back and you look at the all-time great breakdowns in metal, like Domination by Pantera, or Blackened by Metallica, the breakdown is fused into the song. There isn't like, you don't always know when it's coming. You can't tell when it's coming, even though you've listened to the song 100 million trillion times, and in the back of your head you know it's coming. There's no like feeling, no drop, no like, you know when you're listening to like EDM and you're like, oh, the drop's coming, the drop's coming, the drop's coming. That's like every deathcore sounds like, you know, the breakdown's coming, the breakdown's coming. But when you listen to Blackened, you listen to Domination, it's part of the song, it's part of the structure. You're sitting there, you're listening to it, and it just happens. It just comes, it flows in. There's not like a cut between the song and the breakdown and then back into the song. It's infused into the whole thing. It's written well into it. The song isn't written around the breakdown like in deathcore. The bass is literally silent. There's like no bass in any deathcore song. Is there even a bassist in the band? Like, think of listening to thrash metal, but every song is off And Justice for All. It would get so repetitive and it was so lacking in depth. Bass is so important for music, but people often forget about it because it's left behind. And a lot of the time, in metal, the bassist will just follow the same rhythms as the guitar, but what makes a bass really stand out in music, and especially in metal, is when the bassist is kind of doing an alteration on what rhythm section is doing. They're following the same pattern, of course, in the same key, but you can hear this a lot on Metallica records before Cliff passed. Cliff isn't actually just following the same rhythms, he's doing his own thing, and that's what made Cliff fantastic. Anyway, that's a different video. That is non-existent in deathcore. That is non-existent. That is just bleh. And my last point about deathcore is that there's little to no musical exceptionalism within the genre. There's no exceptional musician that you could point to say and be like, dude, he's one of like the all-time greats at this. He's one of the all-time great vocalists, guitarists, bassists, drummers, because everyone's basically playing the exact same song structures and the exact same music and relying on the exact same things within the genre to make it what it is. When there are exceptional talents and there are exceptional musicians within the genre, they all go on and play different genres of music, like the guys in Bullet for My Valentine or Job for a Cowboy, who go on to play death metal and technical death metal, and Whitechapel, who on their latest album actually went into more of a prog or groove metal territory. And I want to give a special shout out to the original vocalist of Suicide Silence, Mitch Lucker, who unfortunately died very early on in his career, but he was one of the exceptions to this rule, and he was a very loud personality and a very essential talent to the formation of the deathcore genre. And Suicide Silence was the biggest band in the genre and is still the biggest band in the genre, and you have to give credit where it's due, even in this case where I'm crapping on this genre nonstop. He was an exceptional talent and an exceptional personality to this genre. May he rest in peace, and you know, props to him for what he did on bringing the genre to the heights that it did achieve. There is deathcore that I like. There is good deathcore, and I wanted to get into that before I ended this video. Now, I want to start off with Whitechapel. Whitechapel is a band that I never liked, that I never really got into, and then they released the song The Valley and that is a very good album. And so on this album, they strayed away from deathcore, they strayed away from that. There's still a little bit on there, but they kind of went into a prog route, they went into a bit of a groove or metalcore route. And the reason why they had to do this is because they wanted to explore different options in their music. Apparently the lead vocalist of the band wrote this album about his childhood experiences within what they called Hardin Valley in Tennessee. Some of the lyrics apparently are from his mother's personal journal from when he was growing up, and that's some deep, intense things that, look, deathcore is such an immature and prohibitive genre that if you're gonna start talking about this stuff, real things, not just my emotions are so deep, and you're going to start talking about real personal things, you're eventually going to stray into the more progressive territory of music because you have no choice, because deathcore isn't going to express those emotions in the way that you need to. And when you listen to The Valley by Whitechapel, you can tell the difference in their music compared to the other albums that they wrote before. It's not the same. Now, I also really like Job for a Cowboy, and I even like their original deathcore stuff. So that Doom EP, that shit is fantastic. And what I like so much about this album is that it really formed the basis of deathcore. It was one of the first deathcore albums before the genre was so repetitive, disgusting, and boring that they were actually able to kind of play with it a little bit. So you hear a lot of the bass coming through. The vocals are kind of varied from, they're not as muffled as other deathcore vocals would become, and they actually utilize the pig squeals really, really well in a way that other deathcore bands, they just run it into the friggin' ground. The album isn't reliant on breakdowns the way other deathcore is. You could tell that they wanted to play death metal, and this would eventually happen on their albums after the Doom EP. And another thing is Infant Annihilator. I talked before about how deathcore takes itself way too seriously and it's so cringy, but a band like Infant Annihilator doesn't do that. They're still playing like this kind of like tech deathcore, and it can be really fun to listen to, and you look at some of the song titles and they're a blast to listen to. If you want to check out some really good deathcore albums, you can check out Doom by Job for a Cowboy, you can check out The Valley by Whitechapel, and you can check out Nocturnal by Black Dahlia Murder. Those are all probably the best deathcore albums. Look, ladies, Whitechapel is straying away from what deathcore is. Anytime that they want to put some substance or some life into the genre, it ends up becoming more than deathcore. It's not important. It's not adding anything to metal music like other genres are. It needs to go the way of nu metal, essentially, and it needs to just stop and accept that that's the way it was and it lived its life. Deathcore isn't a good genre of metal. It sucks. It sucks. And you can call me a gatekeeper and an elitist, but that's the way it is. Now, I want to hear what you have to say about my opinions down below. You can tell me to blow it up my ass. You can tell me to get fucked. Whatever you want, you can put it down below, because as much as I like to say my opinions on here, I want to hear what you have to say. So let me know what you think of what I had to say here down below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you next time on the heaviest show in the universe.